I'm Luke Fretwell, and this is the GovFresh podcast. PDF, short for Portable Document Format, is a file type created by Adobe that lets people easily create documents. Governments love PDFs. They're used for meeting agendas and minutes, newsletters, staff reports, and, well, everything imaginable. When not created properly, and often they aren't, they're inaccessible. But there are broader public service problems PDFs cause, particularly in the machine-readable direction we're heading. They are cumbersome, and research shows that people just don't like them. In this episode, I speak with Department of Civic Things CEO Rebecca Woodbury. Rebecca works with governments on content strategy and implementation. This includes PDF audits and best practices. Rebecca and I talk about why PDFs are a digital experience pain point and how government can move beyond them. Let's start off with explaining what a PDF is.
So a PDF, it's a file format, and it's from the 90s. So we're talking about 90s internet, which this was really a time to be online. We're talking You've Got Mail, The Dancing Baby, GeoCities, the sound of the dial-up modem.
Grunge.
Yeah. So the file format, it was developed in the 90s so we could share documents in a consistent way across different devices, different operating systems. And the format really took off in the late 90s when Adobe made Acrobat Reader free. So the file format was developed by Adobe. Again, when Reader became free in the 90s, there was a huge increase in PDFs. And then flash forward to 2008, PDF became an open standard, and it wasn't controlled by Adobe anymore. Instead, it was published by the ISO, the International Organization for Standardization. And then flash forward another decade, ISO released an update to the PDF that finally focused on more modern features in terms of improved accessibility, improved security, and tagging for, better screen reader compatibility and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. So it's been around for a while. It's seen a lot of things.
Yeah, it's funny that I didn't know that it was an international standard. So I don't know what that means in the scheme of things, but if it makes me feel better. But I had no idea that it was a standard. So how does government use them?
So government uses them for everything. Mm-hmm. Most commonly, I see them used for public meeting materials. This is probably when you look at a government agency and you look at the makeup of their PDF, really sizable portion of their PDFs are going to be things for meetings. So this can include agendas and minutes. It also, a lot of the documents for meetings are the reports that get used in meetings. So this is what might be called a staff report. And then often these reports have a lot of attachments as well. So all of these things are PDFs. And usually they're kind of separate PDFs that you have to navigate so one single meeting might have a ton of PDFs associated to that one meeting. Mm. The next most common type of PDF that I see in government is what I would call a report. So this might be like a budget report or an environmental impact report, which can be thousands of pages long and can be multiple documents, or like a white paper on a topic. And then we see PDFs get used for just kind of like anything. So flyers, forms, maps, press releases, policies, contracts, public notices, letters. Um, the work of government is it's a lot of documentation, and so all of this documentation that government is producing, it usually ends up being turned into a PDF.
Hmm. Yeah. So there's all types of file formats, right? There's,
Hmm.
doc, there's PDF, HTML. Um,
Hmm.
why, well, why does government use PDF? Like, what is the why do they use that particular format?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, not necessarily the PDF, but to start with, government is producing a lot of documentation and they want to share that documentation. That's
Hmm.
in their effort to be transparent, right? They want to be able to share information online in a consistent way with a lot of people.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of, they've got a lot of documentation. They want to be able to share it. Um, when we think about why these things end up as PDF, I think it's really that they are very easy to create
Yeah,
with the standard software that government staff get on their desktop computers.
I see.
So they usually will be working within Microsoft. That's probably the most common. Not all governments are on Microsoft, but many, many governments are kind of using the Microsoft suite. So Word, PowerPoint, Excel. And it's just very easy to take one of those documents and
Yeah.
then turn it into a PDF, file export or whatever. And then in addition to that, most of the other software that governments are using to manage all of their content across, permitting systems or ERPs or all of these different systems that they're using. The other thing that is very common is those systems will have export to PDF
Hmm.
built in very simply. So it's very easy. And and also, when we think about, well, why not HTML, for example, not all staff get access or sufficient training to do something different with the information. So a PDF is something that pretty much everyone knows how to, export something as a PDF, but they
Right.
may not have either the access or the skills to make a web page.
Yeah.
So, and I think something about the nature of the PDF creating, when you take your Word document and you can create a PDF that looks exactly like that in that consistent way, there's this there's this perception in government of what I would call like officialness. They want something to look official because it's
Yeah.
coming from the government. And so they want the government seal to be there. They want maybe the letterhead or like a signature, And in order for them to kind of design that in like a Word doc or something and then PDF it, I think there's this perception that that then looks like an official thing. And, governments love being official.
Yeah.
So I think that just the ease of use and then the ability to kind of make something look a certain way, again, very easily.
Yeah. Well, it is an interesting point in exporting a document into a PDF format, whether it's through Google Docs, Microsoft Word, or any
Hmm.
program. I think the functionality of a PDF is that you can put images into a Word doc and text and export it to an HTML file. But the challenge is that you have to have subfolders for those images or they won't show
Hmm.
up because of the way
Right.
that, but with a PDF, the image is embedded into it. So then when it's exported, it's just one file and that's all you've got to deal with is that one file. Whereas if you have a folder, you can't, you know, send the whole folder via email to somebody and then they've got to like download it and do things to, it's got to be
Right.
all be downloaded. So there are some functional benefits to exporting something to a PDF. as opposed to like an HTML, or web file. Um,
Right.
but it depends on the context, like when you're sharing it, how people are sharing it. Like if you're just going to push it to a website, there's some work that needs to be done. But I get that there are benefits to a PDF and that everything is shipped and embedded into one document
Hmm.
and, neatly or not neatly designed for, consumption.
Yeah.
Um, so aside from like what are the problems with what do you see as the problems with PDFs?
Okay. How much time do we have?
We have as
There's
long as you want, and we're not FCC regulated, I don't think, so you can drop as many F bombs as you want.
so while they're very easy to create, um, there's a ton of problems with PDFs. The largest issue is that most of them are not accessible to people using assistive technologies, such,
Mhm.
like a screen reader or something. Um, and it takes specialized knowledge and software to make sure a PDF is accessible. And most government staff don't know how to do this. So it's not that you can't make a PDF more accessible. It's just that many people don't know how, and so many of them are not. So
Right.
that effectively means that, many people, a PDF is useless to them.
Mhm.
Um, and there's a lot of really critical information in PDFs, like we just talked about, meeting materials. How do you participate in a public meeting if you cannot access the information that is part of that meeting? Um, so, from a usability
Yeah.
standpoint, they're also really difficult to view on mobile. You often have to pinch and zoom to read the text. It can be a really disruptive mobile experience when all of a sudden your phone is downloading a PDF and you have to find it and read it and then try to figure out how to navigate back to the web page you were on originally. So, it's a super disruptive experience. And they can be slow to load. They can take a lot of bandwidth to load. So this can be a problem for people that have like expensive data plans. It can be a real problem during emergencies when bandwidth is really limited and spotty.
Yeah.
So this means that if someone's bandwidth is really low, they can have extreme difficulty downloading and consuming information in a PDF. So if you're putting things like evacuation notices in PDFs, I mean, you are creating major safety issues.
Yeah.
And even not on mobile, it still creates a disjointed user experience. So, for example, like with service delivery, like say, applying for a permit, it can be really hard to navigate a process like getting a permit where there's different steps and a lot of things to kind of keep an eye on as you're getting a service. It gets even harder when you have to navigate that when with multiple PDFs that you have to download and keep track of. So, you can imagine a much more superior flow is when people can make their way through a series of well-designed web pages that give them the information they need when they need it, instead of kind of a clunkier experience of juggling PDFs. Um, PDFs also don't perform as well as regular web pages when it comes to search engines.
Mhm.
So we talk about search engine optimization.
Yeah.
Um, you can find PDF in search, but it's far better using web pages. They can also be just really hard for staff internally to keep track of, keep up to date.
Yeah.
So you end up with version control issues if you're not
Mhm.
really, you know, managing your PDFs well. And all of this, kind of circling back to the accessibility challenge of them, this PDF situation that governments are in is a really, really big deal right now.
Yeah.
Because for state and local governments, um, next year, a new accessibility law is going into effect. And the law requires all online content that state and local governments manage, including PDFs, has to be accessible.
Mhm.
And most governments, like even small governments, have thousands of PDFs online.
Wow.
And larger governments, we're talking about tens of thousands.
Wow.
And in most cases, if not all cases, these PDFs are not accessible. So this
Right.
is a really big deal for them to start to wrap their head around.
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple of things to parse out. I think, to your comment on access, right, especially in a disaster, but just in general, most PDFs are not, they're a megabyte or more. They can be really heavy
Right.
documents. I think on the functionality, the mobile functionality, I remember there was a time when, and I feel like I'm fairly technically savvy, when I was clicking on a link on a web page that went that was linked to a PDF, and it was on my phone and it downloaded, but I didn't see that it downloaded.
Right.
So it just looked like the link was broken or the page
Right.
didn't. And so I clicked it again and didn't see it. And then finally I thought maybe I downloaded it and it just, like, I didn't get the message that it said it was downloading. And sure enough, there were two files on my phone. And I don't even know, like, it took me several minutes to find where to download. This was years ago. It took several
Yeah.
minutes to figure out, like, where would a PDF be downloaded onto my phone.
Right.
Um, and I think, to your point on the versioning, with PDF, you can send something over to somebody and, it's sort of written in stone, almost literally, right? It's not commentable, it's not editable, it can be, but it's just not as flexible unless you have software on your,
Mhm.
both people have software that is proprietary and you have to pay for it to manage and modify it.
Mhm.
Um, and I think also to your point on search engine optimization, you know, the metadata and the data aspect of a PDF often doesn't get managed well. So, they're editing the document, but not the metadata, which then has impacts on search engine optimization, social media reach, but also generally just data structure, right?
Mhm.
So, in layman's terms, right, like try to copy and paste a PDF and you'll spend your whole life reformatting it in a different
Right.
document. And that's a huge challenge. And what that translates to in the machine readable, if you're trying to scrape PDFs for data, to pull data into a database or whatever, or an application, the the PDF is going to jumble up all of that data. So you have to go in and clean it all up by hand, or maybe AI now. But it's just, there's no structured data. The data is really janky. So it causes a lot of problems. SEO, social
Mhm.
media, you know, using that repurposing. So it's just kind of clunky, but fundamentally just copying and pasting a PDF can be really problematic. Um,
Yeah.
all right. So if there's thousands of PDFs and there's a law, are people, I hear this term remediation, PDF remediation. So what is that? And what about it? Why is that? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it in between?
Yeah. So I think my worry is that remediation may appear to be a silver bullet. Um, However, so let me start with remediation refers to fixing the accessibility issues in a PDF. So remediating the PDF includes the heading structure, the alt text for any graphics or charts or graphs, or tags, color contrast, metadata that you just mentioned. So fixing all of those things that might not be accessible in a PDF. That's the process of remediation. And there's two ways kind of for a government to think about doing this. They can train their own staff and do remediation in-house. Their staff will need Adobe Acrobat Pro, a license for that, and then specialized training, but then that can be done in-house. Or they can hire a PDF remediation company, which kind of sounds like a silver bullet to this problem. But the challenge with it is whether you do it in-house or hire a PDF company, it's a tedious process.
Yeah.
So it is either going to take your staff a lot of time, or it's going to cost you a lot of money to hire another company. It's also, to work with a remediation company, you're going to need access to the source document. So you can't just give them the PDF. You have to give, oftentimes they will ask for the actual, like the original Word document that was used to create that PDF. And you may or may not have that anymore.
Yeah.
You also that company is going to need access to a subject matter expert to help develop the alt text for descriptions or any graphics like charts, graphs, right? The company is not going to have that specialized knowledge to know how to write that alt text. So no matter your approach when it comes to remediation, it's going to be an expensive process. So a better approach is to really reduce your reliance on PDFs to make less of them and to have less of them. So instead, take stock of your PDFs and figure out which of them would be better as web text and convert those into web text. And not only is this going to be a more economical approach long term, you're going to end up with better, higher quality, more usable content in general. So you're going to solve all of those problems that we just outlined as being kind of the problems with PDF.
And what are some of the examples of the alternatives that people are doing in kind of a, in a non-PDF way, like web formats, like forms? Are there how are content management systems a solution to the anti-PDF?
Yeah, I mean, the most basic alternative is what you would think of as a web page. So we would call that HTML text or web text. So converting what, once was a PDF into a web page. That's kind of the most basic thing. So, it means taking a web text based approach to the information and the services that you provide. So that's either using your website or web-based applications. The same accessibility principles apply, sequential headings, alt text, but it's much easier to manage content on a website or a web-based application when it comes to these things. And a well-designed online platform, web form, that's also just a much more streamlined approach than, the PDF version of a form where you have to download it and then complete it and then figure out how to submit it.
And
when you've
mail it
got
back using a stamp.
Right, or drop it off. It can be a very clunky experience to figure out what to do when you have to turn in a PDF form. And so, speaking to content management systems, within a content management system, you use what's called a content type or a widget to kind of structure your data, structure your information using web text and HTML text. So one of the things to start doing is using those content types and those widgets within your CMS to display the information that would otherwise be in a PDF. So, for example, using a news post content type, which is very common across content management systems, using that instead of posting a PDF press release, or using an event listing content type instead of posting a PDF flyer for an event.
Right.
So, using these content types to display the information that otherwise would be in a PDF. And I think there's some opportunity for government CMSs to build better and more purpose-built content types for this PDF problem. So, for example, we talked about how a lot of PDFs are related to public meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of public meeting software out there that governments use to manage kind of their meetings and the information associated to their meetings. And many of them have like the ability to produce an agenda as HTML text, as regular web text. But
Yeah.
I haven't seen yet any software that allows you to also create your staff reports or the attachment as HTML content. So far, everything I've seen, those things are still PDF based.
Yeah.
I've seen, sf.gov, they built a content type for reports. It includes a table of contents with jump links, so you can navigate a pretty lengthy report as web text. I think that's a great example. I've seen some federal agencies that are using HTML text for things like warning letters and notices. So I think that would be a great kind of content type to see more of. And then I would also really love to see like even more of an open, like it'd be amazing to see an open source kind of wiki type tool for policy documents. So things like ordinances, resolutions, charters, codes. I know, Luke, we've talked about like, what if government was on GitHub, right? Like, I think that there's some real opportunity for all of those policy documents to be web text as well. I know that there is some software out there that governments use. It'd be great to see more and better tools for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, defaulting to text is really important, right? Everybody wants to add a bunch of images and, embellishments, but really defaulting to text for information, whether it's a newsletter or a press release, especially, you want to add a photo of the last year's event or whatever. But I think that just defaulting to text is okay. And then and the same with a press release. So you don't need, to your point, you don't need the logo, the letterhead logo on a press release in a web file, on a web page. You just need the text. But I think, having alternatives is important, right? PDF, HTML, you can have both of them, but when you default to just PDF, then that's when it becomes a problem. If you defaulted to text or machine readable text, HTML, and then provided a PDF alternative, then that's okay.
Right.
So who is doing a really great job of moving away from PDFs, and how are they doing it?
Yeah, outside of government, I have heard that the Mayo Clinic has been making a lot of progress. There's a lot of PDFs and replacing them that you now find when you are searching for your symptoms. You can now find as web text through the Mayo Clinic. I've also seen universities making a lot of headway. So in higher education, there's been a lot of movement to replace documents and service information that are in PDFs with HTML pages. They're doing a lot to develop trainings and checklists. There's a lot of auditing going on. So there's a lot of really great work being done in higher education. On the government side of things, the UK and Canadian governments as well as the US web design system, they all encourage HTML text by default, and they
Hmm.
all discourage PDFs.
Hmm.
Um, and each of the UK, Canada, US web design system, they have really great guidance and tools and policies even to support this. I think the UK maybe has the strictest kind of guidelines around requiring justification for something to be a PDF.
Yeah.
But these groups, they have web teams that are, removing and converting PDFs regularly. So it's really great to see. And then, a team that I actually worked with a while back, the digital accessibility team, I want to give kudos to them at the County of Marin.
Hmm.
They have made document accessibility a big part of their work. And I
Yeah.
learned a lot from working with them. They're doing a lot of work to work with departments on auditing their PDFs, learning how to make accessible documents, and then remediating them. So, really, really great to see them doing that at the local government level.
And so, when is a PDF appropriate?
Um, Many would argue that it's never appropriate to use a PDF, but I think that we're a long way from that reality when it
Hmm.
comes to where most governments are at. I think there are certain circumstances where it does make sense. So, maybe for a very long report or study, we're talking hundreds of pages,
Hmm.
a lot of pagination going on. I think that, in that instance, it might be, appropriate to have an accessible PDF. Um, there are things that government makes that the use cases that they need to be printed. So, for example, a poster for a workplace that needs to be printed out and posted, or a
Right.
flyer, that people are going to print and hand out in person at an event or something. Like those things are meant to be printed. So I think a PDF version, works really well for that kind of a thing. And then the other one that I've come across a lot is are things like technical drawings, like blueprints or elevations. So these
Yeah.
are things that are part of like developer plan proposals. So these are in meeting materials for public hearings. Um, I am not aware of a better way to share these types of things.
Hmm. Yeah.
I would love to see that. I don't even know how you make these things accessible and even as PDFs. I'm not sure. But that would be that to me seems like those things will continue to be PDFs for some time.
Yeah. Any parting thoughts to government on PDFs?
Yeah, I think what I really hope government does, or is kind of forced to do because of this new law, is to shift its mindset on PDFs to really, instead of just defaulting to PDF, default to web text instead, and recognize that when you default to web text, you are making far superior web content when it comes to people finding the information, consuming the information, sharing the information.
Mhm.
It's just going to be so much better. When you think about being a service oriented organization, you know, PDFs are really they are really where services go to die.
Yeah.
Um, Services become very disjointed when people have to navigate a lot of PDFs. And so if you really want to, you know, improve your services, break free of all those PDFs that people have to juggle when trying to get a service. And really shift your mindset about this idea of officialness. If information is on your official government website, it's official.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to have a certain look
Right.
um, to it. And so I really want governments to kind of embrace and shift their mindset around PDFs and really embrace web text instead, and recognize that it it's just a lot better than a PDF.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the GovFresh podcast. To subscribe and hear past episodes, visit podcast.govfresh.com.